All right, so thank you for inviting me. Today I'm going to be speaking about the cottage food law as well as a new canning program that we have here at SDSU Extension. But prior to get starting, so I work part-time with SDSU Extension. I've been working with SDSU Extension, I think, since August 2017. But I also work with General Mills full-time as a food safety and quality manager for their external supply chain. And then in the extension role, primarily what I've been focusing on is value-added foods. So this is a little bit of my background, but I will go ahead and get started. And so today, as I mentioned, I'm going to be talking about cottage food law and the non-evidence-based recipe review program, and maybe talk about some emerging products, but we don't necessarily need to talk about that pending the time. So one other caveat, if you have questions during the presentation, just feel free to ask me, and I'll do my best to answer it. So don't feel like you have to wait to the end of the presentation. Okay, so the cottage food law was updated in 2022, and so one of the bigger changes that came along with that change was the change to allowing non-temperature controlled goods and baked goods. Previously, the law just allowed for non-temperature controlled baked goods, but with the passage of the law, it includes non-temperature controlled goods as well to be sold at your residence, at a farmer's market, or at a temporary roadside stand. And so oftentimes they get questions around, I understand the law, Curtis, it makes sense, but how does that actually apply? And so these are some examples of non-temperature controlled goods. So a lot of the questions that I had was around, hey, Curtis, what can I do for do candies fall under there? Do dry mixes, do seeds, grains, nuts, do, all of these other non-temperature controlled goods? And for the most part, the answer is always yes, is that low moisture, low water activity foods fall under this. However, there are some examples where you may have a food product yes, it might be non-temperature controlled, but if it's like a jerky, that falls under South Dakota Animal Industry Board or potentially FSIS USDA. If it's like a freeze-dried ice cream, that would be the same. It would be a product that's not covered under the cottage food law. Rather, it would be Department of Ag, or something like honey. Even though it's not temperature controlled, it falls under the South Dakota Department of Agriculture. So the guidance that I would just give there is that if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to either myself or to the Department of Health, and we can help give some guidance on what sort of requirements or where your product may fall, given how it's processed, and what type of product and what type of packaging you're using. Okay. Another significant change that was made was to canned goods. And so with canned goods, it's still only allowing for acid or acidified canned goods. And so that would be products that have a pH of 4.6 or less, or have a water activity of 0.85 or less. And so the big change here is that you have essentially two options. The first option would be to take an online food safety course that's been approved by the Department of Health. That will last 5 years. It costs $40, but it goes somewhat in depth around safe canning practices. It's more geared towards canning since that's the higher risk process. Or there's still the opportunity to have your canned goods reviewed by a third-party processing authority. That would be SDSU Extension or myself. The cost would be free, but those are essentially the two options. And so the big change is that no longer do you have to send your products in to a third-party processing authority. You can take the approved online food safety course, and after that, you can sell acid or acidified canned goods under the cottage food laws. And so this is just a general outline of what the course is there's 8 modules, and there you see what the 8 modules are. Just a little bit about the course. It probably takes around, it's self-paced. It takes about 4 to 8 hours to complete, depending on how engaged you would be. There are quizzes in there. A lot of times I get questions of what happens if I fail. The quizzes are set up to allow infinite amount of tries on the quizzes until you pass them. And so really it's an opportunity to learn more about safe canning. As I mentioned, it's only $40. It would take a few hours of your time, and then that would allow you to start selling canned goods. And so for the most part, what I've heard is fairly good reviews, or I would say pretty good reviews, is people are able to access it, make sense. Once they're able to complete it, they're allowed to sell their canned goods. And so I think it's been an option that a lot of residents in South Dakota have liked or have enjoyed. And so the other option is you can have your product tested by SDSU Extension. You would just need to send in some information regarding the recipe, the process. And then what we would do is we would test the pH of the product, and the cost of all of this, it would be free. And then there's also a non-evidence-based recipe process that I'll be talking about later. But essentially, once your product has been reviewed, you are allowed to sell it. And so people sometimes like this option if they have a recipe that deviates slightly from an evidence-based recipe. And so they're wanting to check and make sure that the processing steps and the pH are all okay. And so this has been an option that still is used by residents, but I would say not as much as the online food safety course. And so another change to the cottage food law would be around baked and frozen goods. And so previously the law did not allow for any fermented or non-heat fermented foods to be sold. And so the law now allows you to sell non-heat processed fermented foods like kuchen, like sauerkraut, as long as that product is kept below 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Additionally, temperature controlled baked goods, those are allowed to be sold. They previously were not allowed to be sold. They would just need to be kept below 41 degrees Fahrenheit. And then frozen fruits, frozen produce, that was not previously allowed to be sold, but now it is allowed to be sold as long as it's frozen. And so as a processor would be allowed to sell this as long as they complete the online food safety course, as mentioned in the previous slides. So it's not like and I'll just make a clarification, the baked and frozen goods are not like the non-temperature controlled goods, where the non-temperature controlled goods, you can basically sell those without taking the cottage food law course. For the baked and frozen goods, you would need to complete the online food safety course to be able to sell those. And so with regard to food labels, there is not a whole lot that has changed here. The required information is still pretty similar to what it was previously. You can see here the disclaimer around the product being produced or not produced in a commercial kitchen. And then you also see some of the specific labeling requirements. One of the things that I get asked here is, under the cottage food laws, do I have to have a nutrition facts panel? And the answer is no. If you decide to sell to retail, I strongly advise it, and so would the Department of Health. But these are the food label requirements that are strictly under the cottage food law. Another one of the questions that I get quite often is, what would need to be true for me to be able to label this product if I have like a smaller product and I can't fit the label on. One of the options that we give is that you can print this information on a sheet and simply just hand it out um, to the buyer, rather than creating your labels and affixing it to the product. Is you could simply just hand out a printed sheet with this information and give it to the buyer at that time. So SDSU also will do nutrition facts panels. And so we have a Genesis software labeling program that is able, and there's an example to the right of a nutrition facts panel. And so what it can do is it can create a nutrition facts panel, but it can also create ingredient declaration statements. Just a call out is that the program is pre-2016. And so the NLEA, Nutrition Labeling Education Act, made an update around 2016 where they required vitamin D, potassium, and added sugars to be calculated. This is pre-2016, and so it is able to calculate vitamin D and potassium, but the added sugars is more of a manual calculation. And so I always just advise users or whoever would like a nutrition facts panel that's some of the limitations of the program. We're still able to provide it to you, but that's a limitation of the program that we have. Another question you might ask is why don't you upgrade? The cost to do it is around $3,500 a year to maintain the license, and at this point we just don't have the funds to do that, or the enough labels or people asking for those type of labels to be done. So that's the reason we haven't pursued it. And then license fees. So essentially, if you fall under the cottage food laws, this makes you exempt from license fees. And so, and when I say license fees, I'm talking about the cost and the fees to be become like your food service license. And so under the cottage food laws, if you fall under any one of these products or categories, you're exempt from that. And so one of the requirements that I call out here specifically is that it's not only just the products that would fall under it, but it's also how you're going to sell it, right? And so under the cottage food laws, you're allowed to sell it at your primary residence, your house, a farmer's market, a roadside stand, or a temporary venue, and you need to be present. And so a lot of folks have asked, well, there's a little craft store and I want to sell it there, but I'm not going to be present. Well, under the cottage food laws, technically you're not allowed to sell that product if you're not present. And so the cottage food laws are actually pretty specific on an individual needing to be present at time or at point of sale. The transaction can take place at the primary residence, or potentially meeting up somewhere and delivering the goods and doing the transaction somewhere else, but you would need to be present. One of the other questions I get a lot is around what constitutes a roadside stand, and so or a temporary venue. And so I've asked for guidance from the Department of Health, and so what we would say, it depends. The rough guidance that I've been given on what a temporary venue would be is it would be a venue that operates for a couple days, for a couple hours, and then and that's about it. And so, as you can tell, like a farmer's market definitely meets that type of a criteria, where they're open for 1 day a week, for a few hours. But the same could be said for a temporary venue where you say, I'm going to set up shop for a couple days and for a couple hours. And then the next question would be, well, what if I want to do this for 14 days in a row over several for several hours, that would be a question that I would direct towards the Department of Health. I'm not sure where the cutoff would be, but they would be the ones to make that assessment and help you understand whether or not you would require a license or a food service license, or if you would still fall under the cottage food law. So it's a little bit of a gray area, but just something to keep in mind. And yeah, I kind of jumped ahead here. So the seller can essentially go to the buyer's location to deliver the food. The law doesn't allow you to ship via mail or carrier. Essentially, you mentioned earlier you would need to be present during the time of that transaction. So I'm gonna stop and pause there. Are there any questions with regard to the cottage food law? Okay. If not, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about a new non-evidence-based canned recipe review. And so this is a new program by SDSU. Oh, go ahead.
We got one question in the chat. If we can back up a second. It says a vendor asked about online sales. Example is a customer orders via the internet and then a third party delivers. Would that be okay?
I would check with the Department of Health on that one. Typically, it's the processor that needs to be present. That would be so under the cottage food law, and this is where I would go on the side of conservative before checking with the Department of Health, is that if it's a third party type of mobile carrier that you're using to deliver the products, I would say that doesn't sound like it falls under cottage food law, but I would double check with the Department of Health to ensure that they interpret the law the same way. Does that make sense? Sorry, I can't see some of the messages.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm noticing is, there may be a retail store that has little vendors inside of it, and people will be selling canned goods or baked goods within that venue, or there'll be a little pop-up vendor fair with baked goods and canned goods. The ones I've been to, nothing's labeled or anything. What are the rules regarding that?
Yeah, if they're not labeled, they should be labeled. So the Department of Health is the one that oversees the cottage food law, as well as the implementation of it. And so with the amount of farmers, so they have a pretty good grasp on farmers markets and where they are. What they don't necessarily have a good grasp on is, and it makes sense, right, is all of the temporary venues and craft fairs that go on. And so they're not able to regulate all of that. But to your question, should they be labeled? Yeah, they still need to be labeled according to the cottage food law. And so if there's a situation like that, that would be something that would probably what I would say is it could be flagged to the Department of Health and just say, hey, there's a temporary or a craft set up here. Wanted to make you aware that they're not being labeled properly, and so that's probably as far as you could take it as a citizen, or I would just say a citizen of South Dakota.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We have one more question in the chat. After the online training, do you get a certificate? And does this need to be present with you at all of your events? Yeah.
So I would say yes to both questions. So yes, you will have an auto-generated certificate of completion. What I would say is just bring it with you just in case. So you can print that multiple times, but just make sure to have that with you just to as evidence that you've taken the course, just so there's there's no confusion or question or anything. You don't need to display it, but I think it'd be good just to have it present.
All right, and one more about labeling. Instead of handing out the ingredient labels, could a vendor have a sign on display with the labels for or information for their products?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, honestly. Or I haven't had that question where um, you would just have a display. Typically, I don't think that that would be the route that most processors would want to go, just simply because there's so much information they're trying to convey about their product that they don't necessarily want to do that. So I mean, I would say the point of having the labels is in the instance that there is some sort of an issue or they need to contact the processor, um, they have that information to go back to. And so I would say the display route probably doesn't really meet the spirit of that. Like a handout or having the label does meet the spirit of that. And so what I would say is I probably wouldn't go the display route. I'd advise on doing a handout or having a label on the package.
Off of that, I'm curious about QR codes. To me, that would fit better on a small package, but the information isn't displayed as quickly as a handout or a label. It would have to be scanned. Have you had anyone go that route?
I have not had anyone ask any questions around QR codes. I think they're good ideas in that you can scan them and you can have all the information present that you would potentially want. I know as part of working with General Mills, that QR code technology is something that is with more people using their phones, obviously, and having information readily available, it's an option. But in terms of what could you have a QR code in lieu of having that information or that labeling? That would be something that a question that we'd have to take back to the Department of Health. I don't know because I have not had that question asked before, but it's a good one.
All right, it looks like there's no more questions on in the chat, so I think we can move forward. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so yes, there is a new non-evidence-based canned good review. Essentially, the reason behind this is we were getting a lot of questions around, or we were getting a lot of questions around, hey, I want to do this to a recipe, I want to do that to a recipe, and if you go to other extensions or across state lines, typically you're going to have a hard time finding that type of a service. And if you do find that type of a service, it's going to be pretty costly. And so what we wanted to do was be able to have a service that could review non-evidence-based, like anything that is not a part of the National Center for Home Food Preservation or anything that's not necessarily like ball published. We wanted to have something that a processor that had a home recipe that they really liked, but was non-evidence based, that they could try that out and have it reviewed and approved. And so we put together a process for that specific reason. And so I'm just going to go over the process here real quick. So essentially, it would be to fill out a product evaluation form. SDSU extension would review it, and then we would either approve it or reject it, or request modifications to it. And so this is a product evaluation form. Essentially what you would do is you would just fill out this information: what's the product, the jar size, what's the yield, and then your ingredients and the list of household measurements. And then the process information: how specifically are you going to be processing this? And you would send this back to SDSU extension, which would essentially be myself. And then what I would do is essentially make your product. So I'd go out, buy the ingredients, and then test it. And so there's some technology that we invested in. This is a temperature probe, and essentially what it just allows us to do is to measure the internal temperature of the product as it's in a boiling water bath canner. And so you can see here just depending on the type of product you have, there's different centers of the lowest heating point. And so basis different heat distribution, heat penetration. We wanted to be able to measure the internal temperature of product. And so this was a necessary part of ensuring that we had the right technology to look at what that the temperature inside the can was doing. And so this temperature probe allows us to record time as well as temperature to verify the amount of time used to process. And then here is essentially just a printout on the left, or an Excel spreadsheet, which says, you know, here at February 17th at 1:12, this was the temperature right here. We can also have this in a graph format, or not a graph, in a table format and not a graph format, but this essentially allows us to track the temperature over time. And what we're looking for is to ensure that there's been a 5 log reduction step, or like a 5 log kill step. That's what's accepted in industry, is that for anything to be considered a kill step, it needs to achieve that 5 log reduction. And so think of a 5 log reduction is like you have 100,000 cells of, say, Salmonella, E. coli. Well, this processing step is going to basically get it down to 0. And so what we wanted to do is ensure that we had some sort of scientific literature to compare this against. And so here's a table to the right. Once we review this time and temperature, we're also going to be comparing it against this table to ensure that there's been a 5 log kill step to this product. And so here is just, I mentioned that there was a graph, and then there was also table information. And so here, as you can see, for example, we see that it's been a 100 or over 180 degrees for greater than 0.1 minute in this time slot right here. And so essentially this data right here is the same information as right here. And so this is information that you or the processor won't see, but this is information that that I'm able to see. And so the time and temperature review for lethality, or for a validated kill step, is the first step. And then the second step is testing of the pH. And so obviously the pH needs to be less than 4.6 to be an acid or acidified good. But for approval, the limit that I've set is it needs to be less than or equal to 4.2. And simply the reason being for that is that there's a lot of variation in processing, in ingredients, pH. And so I wanted to make sure that there's a safe buffer there to ensure that if there's any sort of variation that occurs, there's a decent amount of buffer there where the product is still going to be safe. So, and then in consideration, the final review is, did it meet that 5 log reduction, and is the pH safe? And so if we've identified that the pH is less than or equal to 4.2, and if it delivers a 5 log kill, I'll approve it. If not, I will recommend some modifications that can be made to the recipe. Recently, I had like a watermelon rind recipe, and I was able to look at the heating curve over time. And so I actually recommended that there be an extra 5 minutes of processing time to ensure that there was a significant amount of buffer. So if something is not approved, there are ways or steps to get it to be approved, but it bases the modifications that would need to take place to the recipe, whether or not those changes are feasible to the quality of that product. The processor may or may not want to move forward, but this would be the process. So the rollout was initially to the master food preservers, and then it was going to be the South Dakota residents. Right now, it's rolled out to all South Dakota residents, and so the cost is free right now. And so the reason that we're able to offer it for free is because the cost to get the supplies, to get the food, we can cover that in our own budget right now. And so if you have a recipe that you want reviewed, the cost is free. And so I'm not gonna go to emerging products, but I'll stop and pause here for any questions on the non-evidence-based recipe section. Can everyone still hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
So as this has gone out to the master food preservers and as you've opened it up, has it gained good traction? Have you had good participation? Have you had to adjust the program in any way?
Yeah, we've rolled it out. I think there have been a total of just 3 people that have used it in state. There's been some people that have gotten wind of it from, so initially when I rolled this out, the University of Georgia, as well as Oregon I don't know how they heard about it, but they heard about it and they were interested in it. And so it sounds like there have been people that have kind of funneled to SDSU extension from other states, and I've taken those on just because I've had capacity to do it. But the people that have done it, had their recipes reviewed, have liked it. The lead time that I would say is typically a month, and the reason I say a month is because the process can be pretty lengthy in terms of reviewing the recipe, buying the ingredients, setting up the testing, and so but for the most part, I've been able to get these done within a week. And I think all the processors that have done it have found it to be pretty straightforward, pretty easy, and they like that it's free. And now they have a home recipe that they're able to say is evidence-based. So to answer your question, not great traction, but the people that have used it have liked it. And then maybe just another, I don't know how to say it, kind of blurb about it. I think SDSU Extension knows that marketing isn't necessarily our greatest strength. And so I don't know if there's been the greatest marketing of this, because simply I'm just not great at marketing. But we've shared it by word of mouth. We've presented it to the Department of Health as well, so they're aware of it. And so we've tried to get it out kind of by word of mouth. We had a press release on it as well. But I don't know if there are many people that are aware of it either.